This is the 7th video of the Minor Prophet series. This is the Book of Nahum. The Book of Nahum has 3 chapters, and it is about judgment against the city of Nineveh and the nation of Assyria. The last time that we talked about Nineveh was in the book of Jonah, and God had sent Jonah to witness to the Ninevites, and Jonah was not too thrilled about that. And ultimately, in the book of Jonah, God showed mercy and compassion to the Ninevites, where they turned to God after Jonah relayed God's message to them. In Nahum, chapter 1, verse 1, we see that Nahum has a vision from God concerning Nineveh again. It's estimated that there are approximately 150 years between the book of Jonah and the book of Nahum. In Nahum, chapter 1, verse 3, it says in part, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power. And in Nahum, chapter 1, verse 9, it says, whatever they plot against the Lord, he will bring to an end. Trouble will not come a second time. I think that this speaks to God's timing and how God is on his own clock and basically not on our time frame, because it took God 150 years between the time of Jonah and the time of Nahum to get angry at the Ninevites. And that's basically what is happening in the first chapter. God is talking about his anger towards Nineveh. And it took him between the time that the Ninevites converted and turned to God in the book of Jonah to them kind of backsliding over generations. It took God 150 years of our time to come back to Nineveh in the book of Nahum and get angry and bring judgment to the Ninevites and to the Assyrian nation. I heard someone say in a video when I was looking at some information on the book of Nahum that sometimes God does not give second chances, because in the book of Nahum, God just comes out on the scene angry. And I don't think that this is correct, because God did give the Ninevites a second chance, but it was in the book of Jonah, not in the book of Nahum. So in the book of Jonah, God sent Jonah to give the Ninevites a second chance, and they took it. But then over generations, they became complacent. They started backsliding. They started going back to their old ways, and God got angry and said, nope, no more. Now we're going to do judgment, because I already sent someone to tell you about it. Sure, it was 150 years ago, but I still did it. And people 150 years ago, the Ninevites 150 years ago, took me seriously. What happened? Like, why all of a sudden are we not paying attention now, 150 years later? Something else I wanted to bring up, just as a side note. In Nahum chapter 1, verse 2, you will notice it starts out saying, the Lord is a jealous and avenging God. But Lord is in all capital letters. And even if your L is larger, the O-R-D is still in all capital letters. Even if it's smaller capital letters, it's all still in capital letters. And I had found out when I was doing some studying on this, that when you see the word Lord in the Bible in all capital letters, even if the L is printed taller than the other letters, that is the same word as Yahweh, the Y-H-W-H. And Yahweh is the personal name that God gave Moses, and it means I am. And Yahweh is also called the Tetragrammaton, and Tetragrammaton just means 4 letters. I think using the name Yahweh reminds us that God never changes and that his promises never fail. Now, I also looked back through the books of the minor prophets that we have already looked at, all the way back to Hosea, and every time the word Lord appears, it is in all capital letters. So God is using the word Yahweh. He is calling himself I am to mean he never changes, his promises never fail, in every book of the minor prophets that we have looked at so far. So I found that to be interesting as well, because that was something that that hadn't been brought to my attention until the book of Nahum. Starting at Nahum, chapter 1, verse 14, Yahweh says, in part, I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. But in verse 15, he tells Judah, in part, no more will the wicked invade you. They will be completely destroyed. And so I think that remembering that the word Yahweh is the name that God is using to refer to himself, when you look at those 2 verses, is extremely strong, because he's saying, I am the great I am. And I came to you once, Nineveh, and I sought you out, and you accepted, but now you've turned your back. So now I'm going to prepare your grave, because now I see you as vile. But to Judah, I am the great I am. And no more will the wicked invade you. And this is a promise that you can stand on, because I am making that promise to you, that the wicked will be completely destroyed, and you don't have to worry anymore. And so it's this, verse 14 is frightening, but in verse 15, it's completely hopeful. Chapter 2 goes into the description of how Nineveh will fall. And in verse 7, the Bible says, it is decreed that the city will be exiled and carried away. So it's a given that Nineveh will fall. In chapter 2, verse 13, God says, Yahweh says, I am against you, declares the Lord. I will burn up your chariots in smoke, and the sword will devour your young lions. I will leave you no prey on the earth. The voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. In chapter 3, verse 5, the Lord says, very similar thing. He says, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. So these 2 verses, when I read them so close together, it made me think of Romans 8:31, where it says, if God is for us, who can be against us? Except God is against Nineveh and Assyria, so it cannot stand. And I thought Psalm 127 was very appropriate. Psalm 127 verse 1 says, unless the Lord, and again, that's Yahweh, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. So unless it has Lord at the foundation of it, it'll never happen. And that's basically what happened with Nineveh. As I was studying today, time and time again, it was repeated that Nineveh crumbled to the point where it took an extremely long time to even find its ruins. Nahum uses very, very strong language in these 3 chapters, and God paints a very colorful picture of how Nineveh and the Assyrian nation falls, and why they fall. Nahum ends the book, chapter 3, verses 18 and 19, addressing Assyria. Verse 18, O king of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. Verse 19, nothing can heal your wound, your injury is fatal. Everyone who hears the news about you claps his hands at your fall, for who has not felt your endless cruelty? And the way I heard it explained was that the Assyrian Empire was a very large, very cruel, very ruthless empire. And people, they were very wicked, and everyone kind of felt the ripple effects of it if they didn't feel the effects of it directly. And so basically, Nahum is saying that the Assyrian Empire, the Assyrian nation will fall. The wound is fatal. Like, it is going to happen. And there is nothing that can stop the bleeding. And that the Assyrian Empire is so far-reaching and so widespread that when people hear of its demise, that they will just clap and jump for joy and be so happy, because basically a lot of people felt the effects of their cruelty and felt the effects of their wickedness. And even though it's not good news for Assyria, it's very good news for the people who were crushed up underneath them. And it's not hopeful for Assyria, but it's hopeful for everyone else, because they'll no longer be under Assyrian rule or the threat of Assyrian rule. I wanted to bring up just one additional thought that I had when I was looking into the Book of Nahum. And that was, I heard a gentleman say on a video that Nahum got the message to deliver to Nineveh that Jonah wishes that he had gotten. That Jonah was just very angry that he did not get to go to Nineveh and say, you're going down. And so I heard the man say, if I could go back in time and say, listen, they're going down, just give them 150 years, it'll be okay, that he would have done it. And so it got me to thinking about that concept, that we don't know God's ultimate plan, even if it takes a couple of 100 years for it to carry out, that there should be an element of obedience, because we just don't know what God has. He says all the time, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And had Jonah known that Nahum would be going to tell Nineveh that there's no hope for you, would he have done things differently? Would he have gladly have gone to Nineveh instead of pitching a fit about it? When I look back on the book of Jonah, it seems to me that Jonah was not only delivering a message that God wanted the Ninevites to hear, but Jonah was receiving a message for a lesson that he himself needed to learn, and that was compassion to his enemies. And so it was kind of a twofer. In the same way, the name Nahum means comfort. And so I wonder if Nahum wasn't sent to Nineveh to deliver this message of downfall and demise and utter destruction because of his delivery style. Because maybe he had a way of delivering the message that really made people hear him for the message that God really needed him to hear. Because when you look back on the story of Jonah's message was a sentence, one sentence. It was like he was throwing a temper tantrum and he was like, okay, fine, I'm going to deliver this one sentence. Okay, God, technically I did what you wanted me to do. And it didn't matter. The Ninevites converted anyway. They heard the message and they paid attention, they understood it, and it did its job. But Nahum went and delivered this very powerful message. And it had a lot of illustration to it and a lot of descriptions to it. And there was some hope in there, but it wasn't for Nineveh and it wasn't for the Assyrian nation. So I wonder if Nahum's delivery style, the way he preached, the way he delivered the vision, was what was needed in that moment and not Jonah's. And if Jonah did his job, but he also needed to learn a lesson as well. And so I just wonder if sometimes the messages that we're given to give, sometimes if they're not also the messages that we need to learn, but then also if maybe we aren't given those messages because of the way we are, the characteristics that we have, like the style that we have. And God goes, you're better suited for that. And as always, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Y'all have a great night. I love y'all.